Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Naruto masters Seductive Jutsu and build Harem? And subscribe if you enjoy the video. And also check the description. So let's begin the story. Naruto Uzumaki pressed his back against the crumbling stone wall of the old Uzumaki safe house. A ruin the mission briefing had conveniently left off the map, and wiped the water from his eyes with the back of his hand. His orange jacket was soaked through, clinging to his frame like a second skin, and the mud caking his sandals made every step feel like dragging boulders. Somewhere behind him, about 40 meters back through the dense tree line, the remnants of the bandit group they'd been tracking had scattered like roaches when the lights come on. The mission was supposed to be simple. Escort a merchant convoy from the border checkpoint back to Konoha. Deal with any trouble along the way. Simple. Except nothing involving Naruto Uzumaki had ever been simple. The ambush had come out of nowhere, not the usual disorganized thugs with rusty kunai and delusions of grandeur. These were trained, coordinated, and they hadn't been after the merchant. They'd been after him. He'd separated from Team 7 during the chaos. Kakashi's orders. Draw them away. Sakura and Sai handled the convo. You handled the distraction. Classic Kakashi. Always trusting Naruto to be the loudest thing in the room, and loud he had been. He'd led them deep into the hills, running hard, throwing shadow clones behind him like breadcrumbs. Most of them had caught up eventually, but a few had slipped away into the hills, and now Naruto was alone, soaked, bruised across the ribs from a solid hit he hadn't quite dodged, and utterly, completely lost. That was when he found the door. It wasn't supposed to be there. The safe house was a ruin. Broken walls, collapsed roof beams, moss crawling up every surface like the earth was trying to swallow it whole. But in the cellar, behind a section of wall that had shifted during the fight, one of his clones had blown the damn thing wide open. There was a door. Old. Iron-banded oak, almost black with age, and it was, impossibly, sealed. Naruto knelt in front of it, rain dripping off his chin onto the stone threshold. His hand hovered over the surface. There was something carved into the wood, kanji, old style, the kind he couldn't fully read, but one character burned itself into his mind with unmistakable clarity. Fuin. Sealing. His blood ran cold, and then hot, because the seal was reacting to him. The kanji glowed, faintly, like embers buried under ash. A pulse of warmth traveled up his arm, through his chest, settling somewhere deep behind his sternum. It felt like recognition. Like a lock that had been waiting for years for the right key. Naruto pressed his palm flat against the door. It swung open. The room beyond was dry, impossibly so, given the state of everything above. The walls were lined with shelves carved directly into the stone, and on those shelves sat scrolls. Dozens of them. Some were crumbling, their edges brown and brittle, clearly ancient beyond measure. Others were sealed in protective casing, preserved with jutsu that still held after what must have been generations. But it wasn't the scrolls that stopped Naruto in his tracks. It was the one in the center of the room. A pedestal, simple, unadorned, held a single scroll. It was wrapped in deep violet silk, tied with a cord that bore the Uzumaki clan symbol. The same symbol that was on his forehead in every family photo he'd never been allowed to see. The same symbol that appeared on every document that followed him through the system. Orphan, Jinchuriki, unknown parentage. Like a brand, he reached for it. The moment his fingers closed around the silk, the warmth in his chest flared again. And this time he heard something. Not with his ears. Somewhere deeper. A whisper, wordless, like the feeling you get standing at the edge of a cliff. A pull that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with instinct. Open it. Naruto didn't hesitate. The scroll was long. Longer than anything he'd seen in the academy, or in the forbidden scroll of sealing that Mizuki had tricked him into stealing all those years ago. The ink was dense, layered with diagrams, hand-drawn illustrations, and columns of text that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves as he read. A feature he'd later learn was a security measure, ensuring only someone with Uzumaki blood could parse the content in the correct order. The first third was familiar territory. Sealing techniques. Barrier formulas. Summoning contracts with entities he'd never heard of. Advanced Fuin Jutsu that made the stuff in the standard curriculum look like children's finger painting. Naruto skimmed these sections, his eyes scanning quickly. He was no genius, but he'd spent enough time around ceiling theory, thanks to Irika-sensei's patient tutoring sessions, to recognize the general structure. It was the second third that made him stop breathing. The heading was written in a calligraphy so elegant it looked almost alive, Kagyoba no Jutsu. The shadow seduction art. The illustration beneath it showed a figure, gender indistinct, robed in shadow, surrounded by a web of lines connecting them to dozens of other figures. The lines weren't weapons. They weren't chains. They were threads of light, golden and warm, pulsing outward from the central figure like a heartbeat. Naruto read, and read, and read. The technique was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It wasn't a combat jutsu. It wasn't a utility technique. It was, at its core, an emotional art, a way of projecting one's own feelings outward, amplified and shaped by chakra, in a way that could be felt by others on a deeply personal level. The scroll explained it in 3 distinct layers. The first layer was the aura, a passive, ambient field of emotional energy that radiated from the user. When activated, it made the user appear more approachable, more trustworthy. People in the vicinity would feel inexplicably at ease, drawn in by a warmth that seemed to have no source. It was subtle, almost undetectable. The scroll noted that even trained genjutsu specialists would have difficulty identifying it as a technique at all, because it didn't manipulate the target's mind, it simply opened it. The second layer was the pulse, an active technique requiring hand signs and focused chakra. When directed at a specific individual, it created a resonance between the user's emotional state and the target's. The target would feel understood, genuinely, deeply seen in a way that few people ever experience. The scroll was careful to note that this did not create false emotions. It amplified what was already there. If the target felt loneliness, the pulse would acknowledge it. If they felt pain, it would be witnessed. The effect was powerful precisely because it was real. The third layer was the seal, a physical touch, accompanied by a specific chakra signature, that created a permanent emotional bond between the user and the target. The scroll described it as a thread of the heart, a connection that would persist regardless of distance or time. The bonded individual would feel the user's emotions faintly, and vice versa. It was not mind control. It was not possession. But it was, undeniably, an influence. A presence in someone's emotional landscape that could not be fully removed once established. The scroll concluded the section with a warning, written in ink that was darker than the rest, almost black against the aged parchment. This art was created by the first Uzumaki to unite the scattered clans of the eastern seas. It was used to heal hearts broken by war, to bridge the gaps between enemies, and to build the foundations of peace. But it was also used, in the hands of those who forgot its purpose, to bind others against their will. For this reason, it was sealed. It requires not merely skill, but the sincerest heart, one that wishes, above all else, to be understood, and to understand others. A selfish heart will corrupt the technique. A lonely heart will amplify it beyond control. Only a heart that has known true loneliness, and chosen, despite it, to reach out, can wield this art without destroying itself and others. Naruto stared at the words for a long time. The rain hammered against the stone above him. Water seeped through cracks in the ceiling, dripping in a steady rhythm that filled the silence. His chest ached, not from the bruise on his ribs, but from something older. Something that had lived inside him for as long as he could remember. Loneliness. He knew that word intimately. He'd worn it like armor for years, disguised as anger, masked as bravado, buried under the loudest laugh and the brightest smile in the village. But it was there. It had always been there. The way people crossed the street when they saw him coming. The way shopkeepers locked their doors. The way children stared at him with fear in their eyes, taught by parents who saw only the monster, never the boy. A selfish heart will corrupt the technique. Was his heart selfish? He didn't think so. He wanted to be Hokage, not for power, but because he wanted to protect people. He wanted them to see him, to know him, to understand that the boy behind the whiskers and the orange jacket was not a demon. He was just Naruto. A lonely heart will amplify it beyond control. He swallowed hard. Only a heart that has known true loneliness, and chosen, despite it, to reach out. Naruto closed his eyes. He thought of Irika-sensei, the first person who had ever looked at him and seen a student worth believing in. He thought of Kakashi, cold and distant but trying, in his own broken way. He thought of Sakura, who had called him a monster once and then, slowly, painfully, begun to see him as something else. He opened his eyes. He rolled the scroll carefully, tucked it into the waterproof seal pouch he always carried, another gift from Iruka-sensei. You lose everything else, Naruto, but you keep this, and stood up. He had a lot of reading to do. 3 weeks passed. Naruto trained every night after the others fell asleep, in the training grounds behind the academy, in the basement of his apartment, in the cramped roof space above the ramen stand where old man Tucci let him sleep sometimes when the nights got cold. He trained alone, in silence, with no clones and no audience. The first week was frustration. Pure, teeth-grinding frustration. The hand signs alone were complex, 14 in sequence, each one requiring a specific emotional state to accompany it. The scroll was explicit on this point. Chakra alone will not activate this technique. The practitioner must feel, genuinely, the emotion they wish to project. It wasn't like any jutsu he'd ever learned. Shadow Clone required focus. Rasengan required precision. This required honesty. And honesty, for Naruto Uzumaki, had always been the hardest thing, not because he was a liar. He wasn't. He was, in fact, almost pathologically incapable of dishonesty. It was one of the things that drove Kakashi crazy about him. But emotional honesty was different. Acknowledging what he actually felt, the fear, the desperate need to belong, the ache of isolation, that was something he'd spent his entire life burying. The scroll demanded he dig it up. So he did. Night after night, alone in the dark, Naruto sat cross-legged on the cold ground and peeled back layers he'd spent years building. He thought about the academy, about the way Sasuke and Sakura had looked at each other like he didn't exist. He thought about the festivals, the celebrations, the way the whole village came alive with color and noise and joy, and how he always watched from the rooftops, alone. He thought about the day he'd opened the forbidden scroll, about how Mizuki had looked at him with disgust, and how that look had felt like confirmation of everything he already believed about himself. He let himself feel it. All of it. And on the 15th night, something changed. He was sitting in the training grounds, the scroll open beside him, his hands running through the 14 signs. He felt the loneliness, raw, immediate, achingly real. And instead of pushing it down, he let it rise. Let it fill his chest. Let it radiate outward, like heat from a fire. The air around him shifted. It wasn't visible, not exactly. But it was there. A warmth, a presence, a subtle field of energy that seemed to emanate from his skin and spread outward in concentric waves. Naruto could feel it touching the edges of his awareness, brushing against the trees, the ground, the distant sounds of the village settling into sleep. He held it for 10 seconds. 20. 30. Then he let it go. His hands were shaking. His breath came in short, sharp gasps, like he just sprinted a mile. But something else was there too, something lighter. Something almost like relief. As if a door that had been locked inside him for 15 years had finally, cracked open. He stared at his hands in the moonlight and laughed. It was a quiet laugh, nothing like his usual booming, infectious roar. It was small, almost fragile, but it was real. The first accidental use happened 4 days later. Naruto was sitting across from Iruka-sensei at their usual spot, a small bench near the memorial stone, where they'd been meeting for ramen takeout since Naruto was 8 years old. It was a Tuesday, nothing special about it. Iruka was talking about something, a new curriculum change at the academy, maybe, or the weather, or one of the dozen small complaints he liked to air in Naruto's direction, and Naruto was half listening, his mind still turning over the details of the scroll he'd been studying the night before. He wasn't thinking about the jutsu. He wasn't trying to activate anything, but he was feeling something. Gratitude. Deep, genuine, almost painful gratitude for this man who had, against every reason in the world not to, chosen to care about him. It rose in him like a tide, warm and bright and completely unguarded, and before Naruto even registered what was happening, it was out. The first layer activated on its own. It was subtle, barely a flicker. A slight shift in the air around him, a warmth that had nothing to do with the evening sun. Iruka-sensei paused mid-sentence. His eyes, kind, tired eyes that had seen too much and smiled through all of it, went soft. Not confused. Not suspicious. Just warm. Warmer than usual. Like someone had turned up a light inside him. You know, Naruto, Iruka said, and his voice carried a weight it didn't usually have. I don't say it enough. But I'm proud of you. Really, genuinely proud. Naruto blinked. Eh? What brought that on, Iruka-sensei? The older man smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and stayed there. I'm not sure, actually. I just felt it. Strongly. He shrugged, as if dismissing his own emotion as a passing mood. Anyway. Eat your ramen before it gets cold. Naruto looked down at his bowl. His chopsticks hovered in the air. What did I just do? He knew. He already knew the answer. He'd felt it. The burst of chakra, the way his emotions had flowed outward without permission. The first layer. Passive, ambient, almost undetectable. He'd used it. Without meaning to, the guilt hit him like a punch to the gut. Iruka-sensei, the one person in this village who had always been there for him, who had never needed to be manipulated or charmed or made to care, had just been touched by it. The warmth Iruka felt, the pride, was it real? Or was it just an echo of Naruto's own gratitude reflected back? The scroll's words echoed in his mind. It amplifies what is already there. Iruka-sensei already cared about him. Already felt pride. The jutsu hadn't created those feelings. It had simply opened the door wider. Made them more present. More immediate. But it was still manipulation. Wasn't it? Naruto set down his chopsticks. He stared at the memorial stone. At the names carved into its surface. Hundreds of them. Ninja who had given everything for the village. He thought about what it meant to reach out. To want to be close to someone. To want them to feel what you felt. Was that so different from what everyone did? Every day? When you smiled at someone to make them feel better. When you said I believe in you to a friend who was struggling. When you looked at someone you cared about and tried desperately to make them see how much they mattered. The jutsu was just more. He picked up his chopsticks again. Ate his ramen. Listened to Iruka talk about the weather, or the curriculum, or whatever it was. And somewhere in the back of his mind, behind the guilt and the questions and the weight of what he'd discovered, a quieter voice was speaking. You finally made someone feel seen, and it wasn't a lie. Naruto looked at Iruka-sensei, at the man's kind face, lit by the last light of the evening, and made a decision. He was going to learn this technique. Fully. Completely. And he was going to figure out, once and for all, what it meant to use it, not to deceive, but to connect. The scroll had warned him. Only a heart that has known true loneliness, and chosen, despite it, to reach out, can wield this art without destroying itself and others. Naruto Uzumaki had known loneliness his entire life, and he had spent every single day of it reaching out. He realized, exactly what the technique had been waiting for. The night deepened around him. The village settled into sleep. And somewhere in the sealed pouch at his side, the scroll of the Kagyobu no Jutsu pulsed, faintly, warmly, like a heartbeat answering his own. He was a creature of instinct, always had been. In a fight, he moved before he thought. In conversation, he said what he felt before his brain had the chance to filter it. His training style was brute force and volume, 100 shadow clones screaming into the chaos like a storm of noise and fury. Kakashi-sensei had spent the better part of 2 years trying to teach him patience, precision, stillness, and had gotten exactly nowhere. But the Kagyobu no Jutsu demanded all three, so Naruto learned them. It took another 2 weeks after the incident with Iruka-sensei. 2 weeks of sitting alone in the pre-dawn dark, legs crossed, scroll open in his lap, running through the 14 hand signs over and over until his fingers ached. 2 weeks of breathing exercises that felt ridiculous. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7, release for 8, while maintaining emotional clarity. Like something out of a meditation manual he'd never have picked up willingly. 2 weeks of talking to himself, out loud, in the empty training grounds, naming his feelings like the scroll instructed. Loneliness, gratitude, frustration, hope, fear, determination. It was embarrassing. It was exhausting. And it was slowly working. The first layer became easier to control first. He learned to feel the boundary of it, the edge where his emotions stopped being his and started bleeding outward into the air. At first, the boundary was invisible, formless, like trying to grip smoke. But with practice, it sharpened. He could feel it now like a second skin, a layer of warmth that sat just beyond his body. And he could choose, consciously, deliberately, whether to let it expand or pull it tight against himself, keeping it sealed. The key, he discovered, was intention. When he was thinking about the jutsu, studying it, analyzing it, turning it over in his mind like a puzzle, the first layer stayed dormant. But when he felt something strongly, when a genuine emotion rose in him without warning, the layer would flicker, wanting to activate. His job was to catch it before it did, to notice the surge, acknowledge it, and then consciously hold it back. It was, he realized, the hardest thing he had ever learned, not because the technique was complicated. It was, but because it required him to be aware of his own emotions at all times, to feel them fully, without suppressing them, and yet maintain enough distance to choose whether or not to project them. It was a paradox. Feel everything. Control everything. Be completely open and completely in command simultaneously. By the end of the second week, he could hold the first layer for up to 5 minutes without losing focus. He could direct it, narrow it to a single person, or spread it wide to cover a radius of 20 meters. He could vary its intensity, from a whisper of warmth to something deeper, more insistent. And he could, finally, stop it from leaking out on its own. The night he achieved that last milestone, he sat in the training grounds and stared at his hands for a long time. The moon was full, hanging fat and bright above the village, and the air was cool and still. He flexed his fingers, ran them through the 14 signs, slowly, deliberately, and felt nothing leak. Not a flicker. Not a pulse. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Okay, he said to no one. Okay. First layer, done. He looked down at the scroll, open to the section on the second layer. The pulse. His stomach tightened. This was the part that scared him. The second layer was not passive. It was not ambient. It required a target, a specific, individual person, and it required Naruto to reach for them emotionally. To project not just warmth, but understanding. To make them feel, in the space of a single breath, that someone in the world truly saw them. Truly knew what they were carrying. Truly cared. The scroll's instructions were precise. To activate the pulse, the practitioner must first establish a clear emotional image of the target, not their appearance, but their inner state. What do they feel? What do they carry? What have they hidden? The practitioner must then mirror this image within themselves, must feel, as genuinely as possible, an empathy for the target's burden. Only when this empathy is real, and the practitioner has formed the connection in their own heart, can the pulse be projected. The effect is immediate and profound. The target will feel, with sudden and unmistakable clarity, that they are understood. This feeling cannot be faked or manufactured. If the practitioner's empathy is false, the pulse will fail, or, worse, will produce revulsion in the target, as the inauthenticity is felt on an instinctive level. The pulse does not alter the target's emotions. It does not implant new feelings. It simply opens a door that the target has, consciously or unconsciously, kept closed. What lies behind that door is entirely the target's own. Naruto read this section 3 times before he closed the scroll and sat back. He knew, with a certainty that settled into his bones like stone, who he was going to test it on. Sakura Haruno had always been complicated. Not complicated in the way that Sasuke was complicated. All brooding silences and sharp edges and a darkness that seemed designed to repel anyone who got too close. Sakura was complicated in a quieter way, a sadder way. She was bright, genuinely bright, one of the sharpest minds in their year. But she spent so much of her energy maintaining a version of herself that it was hard to tell, sometimes, where the performance ended and the real person began. Naruto had watched her do it for years. The way she smiled at Sasuke, wide, eager, desperate, and then, when Sasuke looked away, the way the smile fell off her face like a mask dropped in an empty room. The way she competed with other girls, not out of vanity but out of a deep, grinding insecurity about whether she was enough. The way she looked at Naruto, was something that had shifted, over the past year, from dismissal to something warmer. Something she clearly didn't have a name for yet. She was lonely. Not in the way Naruto was lonely, not isolated, not rejected. She was lonely in the way that people who are surrounded by others but never truly seen are lonely. She had friends. She had a team. She had people who cared about her. But none of them really knew what was going on inside her head. Naruto knew this, because he'd been watching. Not the way he used to watch, all noise and bravado and desperate attempts to get her attention. He'd been watching the way the scroll taught him to watch, quietly, attentively, with genuine curiosity about the person behind the pink hair and the sharp tongue, and he'd seen it. The loneliness. Clear as glass. The sparring session was Kakashi's idea, a standard Team 7 training day, nothing unusual about it. The morning was warm, the sky a pale blue, and the training grounds were quiet except for the distant sound of birds and the occasional crack of wood as someone drove a fist through a practice dummy. Kakashi leaned against a tree at the edge of the field, nose buried in his orange book as always, one visible eye scanning the grounds with the lazy attention of a man who could react to anything in half a second. Sai stood nearby, sketching in his notebook, his version of warming up, apparently, and in the center of the field, Naruto and Sakura faced each other across 15 meters of open ground. "Alright," Kakashi said, not looking up. "Sparring match. No killing blows, no jutsu above B rank. First one to land 3 solid hits wins. Go." Sakura moved first, she always did. Quick, precise, her footwork flawless. She'd been training with Tsunade-sama for months now, and it showed. Her strikes were sharper, her angles better, her instincts for the fight refined in ways that made Naruto genuinely impressed every time they went at it. He let her come, not out of disrespect, not out of laziness. He let her come because, for the first time in his life, he was thinking during a fight instead of just reacting. The scroll's training had done that, had taught him to slow down inside his own head, to observe before he acted, to consider the moment before he threw himself into it. Sakura closed the distance in 2 seconds. Her fist came in high, a feint, he could tell. The real strike would be the low kick she was setting up. He sidestepped, let the kick pass, and brought his forearm up to block the follow-up elbow strike she transitioned into when the kick missed. The impact jarred his arm. She was strong now. Genuinely strong. "Not bad," he said, and meant it. Sakura's eyes narrowed. She pressed forward, driving him back with a flurry of strikes. Palm, elbow, knee, each one aimed with surgical precision. Naruto gave ground deliberately, reading her rhythm, waiting for the pattern to emerge. There, she favored her left side after a combination. A half-second of vulnerability. He could have exploited it. Could have closed the gap and landed a clean hit. Instead, he did something different. He felt her. Not physically. Not through the fight. He let his awareness expand. Not the jutsu, not yet, just his own attention, sharpened by weeks of emotional training, and he looked at her, at the tension in her shoulders. At the way her jaw was set tight, the way it always was when she was trying to prove something. At the flicker in her eyes, determination, yes, but underneath it, something quieter. Something that looked a lot like "please see me." The empathy rose in him like a tide. Not manufactured. Not forced. It was simply there, a genuine, aching recognition of what she was feeling, because he knew that feeling. He'd lived it his entire life. He let it build. Let it fill his chest. Felt it settle into the space behind his ribs, warm and real and undeniable. And then, with the precision of a surgeon, he activated the second layer. The pulse went out. It was invisible. Soundless. A single, focused burst of emotional resonance directed at Sakura like a beam of light, not bright enough to blind, but bright enough to warm. It lasted less than a second, a heartbeat. A single exhale. Sakura stopped mid-strike. Her fist hung in the air, frozen, her weight balanced on one foot in the middle of a lunge. Her eyes went wide, not with shock exactly, but with something deeper, something that looked almost like recognition. Like a word she'd been searching for her entire life had just been spoken aloud, and she was hearing it for the first time. Her lips parted. Her breath caught. Then, just as quickly as it had come, the expression was gone. Her eyes refocused. Her stance shifted. She pulled her arm back, took a step away, and shook her head, a small, unconscious motion, like shaking water from her ears after swimming. "What?" she said, and then stopped. Frowned. "Did you do something?" Naruto kept his face calm. Easy. Relaxed. It was a mask, but a good one. One he'd been practicing for weeks, for exactly this moment. "Do what?" he asked, tilting his head with an innocent shrug. "You zoned out for a second." "You okay?" Sakura stared at him. Her cheeks had flushed, faintly, barely noticeable, but Naruto saw it. She blinked, looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "Yeah," she said slowly. "Yeah, I'm fine. I just felt something." For a second. She shook her head again, more firmly this time, and dropped back into her fighting stance. "Again. Let's go again." They sparred for another 20 minutes. Naruto let her land all 3 hits. She earned them, and he wanted her to feel good about the session. When it was over, Sakura was breathing hard, sweat beading on her forehead, a satisfied flush on her cheeks that had nothing to do with the pulse and everything to do with the workout. But something had shifted. Naruto could feel it, not through the jutsu, but through simple observation. The way she lingered after the session ended, wiping her face with a towel, watching him stretch. The way she said "good session" instead of her usual dismissive nod. The way, when they walked back toward the village together, she stayed close. Closer than she usually did, her shoulder almost brushing his. It wasn't love. Naruto knew that, and he was careful to remind himself of it. The pulse hadn't made her fall for him. It hadn't implanted anything. It had simply opened a door she'd been keeping closed. The door to the part of herself that wanted to feel understood. And behind that door there was warmth. There was comfort. There was the beginning of something that might, in time, grow into something real. But it was her choice. Her door. Her heart. He hadn't taken anything from her. He'd just shown her it was there. Kakashi noticed the change within 48 hours. To his credit, the man was observant in ways that most people didn't appreciate. He spent so much time reading his book, slouching against trees, arriving late to everything, that people assumed he wasn't paying attention. He was. He was always paying attention. It was one of the things that made him one of the best jonin in Konoha. The ability to watch, to analyze, to wait, and to see patterns that others missed entirely. And the pattern he saw in Naruto was unmistakable. It started small. During the sparring session, Kakashi had noticed the moment Sakura froze, had flagged it internally as unusual, filed it away, and moved on. But over the next 2 days, he noticed other things. The way Naruto carried himself had changed. Not dramatically. Not in any way that would be obvious to a casual observer, but to Kakashi's trained eye, it was clear. Naruto was calm. Not the artificial calm of someone forcing themselves to be patient. Not the jittery, barely contained energy that Naruto usually radiated like heat from a furnace. This was a genuine, settled stillness, the kind that came from someone who had found something inside themselves that they hadn't known was there before. A center. A ground. He moved differently too. Quieter. More deliberate. When he walked, it was with purpose, not the restless, bouncing stride of a kid who couldn't sit still, but the measured pace of someone who was aware of where they were and why. When he talked, he still talked loud. That hadn't changed, and Kakashi suspected it never would. But there was a warmth to it now, an intentionality. Like every word was chosen, not just thrown out into the air. And there was something else. Something harder to pin down. People responded to him differently. The woman at the flower shop smiled wider when he passed. The kids at the academy playground, kids who, a month ago, would have scattered at the sight of the demon boy, watched him with curiosity instead of fear. Even the shopkeepers on the main street, who had spent 15 years refusing to serve him, or overcharging him when they did, seemed to soften when he walked by. Not all of them. Not dramatically. But enough. Kakashi watched all of this from a distance, one eye hidden behind his hideout, the other tracking Naruto's movements through the village with quiet, careful attention. Something had changed in his student, and Kakashi, who had seen enough strange and dangerous things in his lifetime to recognize when something unusual was happening, filed it away under a different category than amusing quirk. He filed it under investigate. It was on the third day after the sparring session that Sakura came to find Naruto at the ramen stand. She hadn't told him she was coming. Hadn't texted. They didn't have phones, obviously, or sent a message through any official channel. She simply appeared, sliding onto the stool next to him at Ichiraku's, and ordered a bowl of miso ramen with an ease that suggested she'd been coming here more often than Naruto realized. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said back. They ate in silence for a few minutes. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. That was the thing that surprised Naruto the most. He and Sakura had never been good at comfortable silences. Their interactions had always been charged with something. Tension, frustration, unspoken competition, the awkward energy of two people who didn't quite know how to be around each other. But now, sitting side by side, chopsticks clicking against ceramic bowls, the silence felt easy. Natural. Like they'd been doing this for years. "I've been thinking," Sakura said, after a while. "Dangerous," Naruto said, grinning. She rolled her eyes, but smiled. A real smile, not the performative one she wore around other people. About the other day. During training, Naruto kept his expression neutral. Easy. Relaxed. It was a mask, but a good one. One he'd been practicing for weeks, for exactly this moment. "What about it?" he asked. Sakura set down her chopsticks and turned to look at him. Her green eyes were serious. More serious than he'd seen them in a long time. There was something searching in them, like she was trying to read something written in a language she was still learning. "I felt something," she said. "When we were sparring. Something I can't really explain." She paused, chewing her lip, a nervous habit she never quite managed to shake. "It was like someone had just told me that everything was okay. That I was okay. Not in words. Just a feeling." Naruto held her gaze. Said nothing. "And the thing is," Sakura continued quieter now, "I've been feeling it ever since. Not as strong. But it's there. This warmth. Whenever I think about you." She flushed, immediately, and looked away. "That sounds weird." "I know that sounds weird." "It doesn't," Naruto said. And he meant it. Sakura looked back at him. The flush was still there, high on her cheeks, visible even in the warm light of the lanterns overhead. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something, mockery, maybe, or the old familiar dismissal that she was so used to. She didn't find it. "You've changed," she said. Simply. Quietly. Like she was stating a fact she just confirmed. Naruto didn't deny it. "Yeah," he said. "I think I have." They finished their ramen. Sakura left first. She had training with Tsunade-sama in the morning, but she paused at the edge of the stand and turned back, one hand raised in a small wave. "See you tomorrow, Naruto." "See you, Sakura." She walked away. Naruto watched her go, watched the way the lantern light caught the pink of her hair, the way she moved through the evening crowd with a lightness in her step that hadn't been there a week ago. Then he turned back to his empty bowl and stared into it for a long time. The pulse hadn't made her feel anything she didn't already feel. The scroll had been clear on that. It had simply opened a door. But he was the one who'd chosen to open it, and he still didn't know, entirely, whether that was okay. Kakashi cornered him 2 days later. Not literally. Kakashi didn't do things like corner people. He simply appeared, as he always did, in a place where Naruto happened to be, with an expression of casual disinterest that fooled absolutely no one who knew him well enough to read it. Naruto was on the roof of his apartment building, sitting on the edge with his legs dangling, watching the sun go down over the village. The sky was burning, orange and gold and deep, bruised purple at the edges, and the air was warm with the lingering heat of the day. It was quiet up here. Private. One of the few places in Konoha where Naruto could sit and think without being interrupted. Kakashi materialized beside him like smoke condensing into human form. "Nice view," he said. Naruto glanced at him. "You're here to ask me something." A pause. Then Kakashi smiled. The upper half of his face, the only part visible above the mask, crinkling with something that might have been amusement, or might have been respect. "Am I that obvious? To me?" "Yeah." Another pause. Kakashi settled onto the edge of the roof, legs dangling alongside Naruto's, and was quiet for a moment. He didn't look at his student directly. He looked out at the village, at the buildings and the streets and the people moving through them like ants in a hive, and his single visible eye was thoughtful. "You've been different lately," Kakashi said eventually. Naruto didn't tense, didn't flinch. He kept his body language open, relaxed, the way the scroll had taught him to when he wanted to appear unthreatening. Different how? Calmer. More focused. Kakashi tilted his head slightly. More present. Like you're actually thinking about what's happening around you instead of just reacting to it. Is that a bad thing? Not at all. Kakashi's tone was light, but his eye was sharp. It's actually impressive. You've been working on something. It wasn't a question. Naruto considered his options. He could lie, deflect, play dumb, attribute the change to meditation or extra training or some other mundane explanation. Kakashi might accept it. Might file it away and move on, but probably not. Kakashi was too smart for that. And Naruto, for all his many flaws, had never been a good liar when it came to the people who mattered. "Yeah," he said. "I have. Want to tell me about it?" Naruto looked at his hands. At his fingers curled loosely in his lap. At the fading bruises on his knuckles from last week's training. "Not yet," he said. And then, meeting Kakashi's eye with a directness that surprised them both. "But I will. When I'm ready. I promise." Kakashi studied him for a long moment. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted. Full of things unsaid. Then Kakashi nodded. Once. A single, deliberate movement. "Okay," he said. "I'll hold you to that." He stood, stretched, and gave Naruto a lazy wave. "Same time tomorrow for training. Don't be late." "When am I ever late?" "Every single time." And then he was gone, vanished into the evening air with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent his entire life disappearing. Naruto sat alone on the roof for a long time after that, watching the last of the light bleed out of the sky. The village settled into its nighttime rhythms below him, lights flickering on, doors closing, the distant sound of laughter and conversation drifting up on the warm air. He thought about Sakura. About the way she'd smiled at him at the ramen stand, genuinely, openly, without any of the walls she usually kept up. He thought about the pulse, and what it had done, and what it hadn't done. He thought about the scroll, still tucked safely in the sealed pouch at his belt, and the third layer he hadn't yet attempted. The seal, a single touch. A permanent bond. A thread of the heart that could not be undone. He wasn't ready for that yet. He knew it. The scroll knew it. The instructions for the third layer were dense with warnings and prerequisites, conditions that had to be met before the technique could be safely attempted. The practitioner must fully understand the target's heart, must have earned genuine trust, must be prepared to carry the weight of the bond for the rest of their life. Naruto wasn't there yet, but he was getting closer. He looked up at the stars, scattered across the darkening sky like spilled salt, and felt, for the first time in a very long while, that the world was not quite as cold as he'd always believed it to be. Somewhere in the village, a door closed. A laugh echoed. A light went on in a window, warm and yellow against the dark. Naruto smiled. Quietly. To himself. Tomorrow, he would train again. Tomorrow, he would push further into the technique, deeper into his own heart, closer to understanding what he was becoming and what he was capable of. But tonight, he would just sit here and feel the warmth. The land of mist earned its name, honestly. It hung over everything, thick, pale, and endless, curling through the trees like living things with fingers. It swallowed sound. It swallowed light. It turned the world into a gray, muffled quiet where the only thing you could be sure of was the ground beneath your feet and the breath in your lungs. Everything else was uncertain. Team 7 had been traveling for 3 days. The mission was straightforward on paper. A C-rank escort job, upgraded from B-rank when intelligence reports flagged increased bandit activity along the eastern trade routes near the Mist border. Protect the merchant caravan. Get them to their destination. Come home. Simple enough, even by Kakashi's standards. But the closer they got to the border, the less simple it felt. The mist thickened as they moved east. The trees grew denser, older, their trunks covered in moss so thick it looked like fur. The air was damp and cold, even in the middle of the day, and sounds carried strangely. Footsteps echoed where they shouldn't, voices seemed to come from directions that didn't match where people were standing. It was disorienting in a way that made even Kakashi stay sharper than usual, his single eye scanning the tree-line with an attention that went beyond casual vigilance. Naruto walked at the back of the column, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the mist curl around his ankles with quiet fascination. He'd never been this far from Konoha before, not on a mission anyway. The landscape here felt different. Not just the terrain or the weather, but something deeper. Something in the air itself, like the land was breathing, and the breath was cold. He'd been thinking about the jutsu, not actively, not the way he thought about it during his late-night training sessions, turning over techniques and hand signs and emotional states in his mind like puzzle pieces. This was more passive, a background awareness, like a hum beneath his thoughts. The scroll's teachings had become a part of him over the past weeks, woven into the way he observed the world, the way he read people, the way he moved through spaces. He couldn't turn it off anymore, even if he wanted to, which meant he noticed things. He noticed the way the merchant, a heavy-set man named Kakashi, with nervous eyes and hands that never stopped moving, kept glancing at the mist with barely concealed terror. Naruto could feel the man's fear like a faint vibration in the air around him. It was old fear. The kind that had settled into someone's bones over years of hearing stories about what lived in these woods. He noticed the way Sakura walked, closer to Sai than she usually did, her hand resting on the hilt of her kunai. Not because she was expecting a fight. Because the mist made her feel watched. Naruto could see it in the set of her shoulders, the slight tension in her jaw. She was on edge, and she didn't like being on edge, and he noticed Kakashi. Their sensei hadn't said a word in hours. He moved through the mist like he belonged to it, silent, fluid, utterly at ease. But his eye was working overtime, scanning every shadow, every shifting fold of gray. Whatever instinct had made Kakashi one of the most dangerous ninja in the world was firing, quietly and constantly, like a second heartbeat. Something was wrong here. Kakashi could feel it, and so could Naruto. The attack came at dusk, not from the bandits they'd been warned about. Not from any human threat at all. It came from the mist itself, or so it seemed. One moment the forest was silent, the gray light filtering through the canopy in pale, even shafts. The next, the air moved, a sudden, violent displacement of atmosphere, like something massive had just broken the surface of still water. The mist swirled, eddied, reformed, and in the center of the disturbance, a figure appeared. Female. Tall. Dark hair pulled back in a severe style that framed a face that was all sharp angles and colder expression. She wore the standard uniform of a mist shinobi, dark blue, functional, unremarkable. But there was nothing unremarkable about the way she held herself. Every line of her body was coiled, balanced, ready. A weapon in human form. She was looking directly at Naruto, not at the merchant. Not at the convo. Not at Kakashi, who had already moved, flashing to an intercept position between the woman and the caravan with the quiet speed that made him terrifying in a fight. She was looking at Naruto. Directly, deliberately, with eyes that were dark and flat and completely, utterly unreadable. Yujito ni, Kakashi said. His voice was calm. Conversational, even. But his hand was on his kunai, and his body was angled to block. Long way from home. The woman, Yujito, didn't look at Kakashi. Her eyes stayed on Naruto. The Jinchuriki, she said. Her voice was low. Flat. Not hostile, exactly. But not friendly either. Somewhere in the dead space between those two things. I wondered if you'd come through here. Naruto felt something shift inside him. A flicker of recognition that had nothing to do with having met this woman before. It was something else. Something the jutsu had taught him to feel. A resonance, faint and distant, like hearing a note played in another room. He could feel her. Not her emotions, exactly. Not yet, not without activating the technique. But the outline of them. The shape. Like looking at someone through frosted glass and seeing, not their face, but the silhouette of who they were. And what he saw made his chest tighten. Loneliness. Deep. Old. Bone deep and all-consuming, the kind that had stopped being a feeling and had become a condition. Like breathing. Like gravity. Just the way things were. He knew that loneliness. He'd lived inside it for 15 years. Stand down, Kakashi said, his tone sharpening slightly. We're not here looking for a fight. Yujito's eyes finally moved, sliding from Naruto to Kakashi with the slow, deliberate motion of someone who was very, very used to being the most dangerous person in any room. She studied him for a moment. Then, without a word, she shifted her stance, not attacking, not retreating. Something in between. Waiting. Neither am I, she said. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. The kind where everyone in it knows that one wrong move will shatter it into something violent and irreversible. Naruto stepped forward. He didn't think about it. Didn't calculate. Didn't run through the 14 hand signs or consciously activate any layer of the technique. He simply moved, stepping out from behind Kakashi, one hand raised in a gesture that was half greeting, half peace offering, and let the feeling inside him do what it wanted to do. The first layer activated. It was subtle. Barely a whisper. A warmth that spread outward from Naruto like heat from a banked fire. Not bright, not insistent, just present. There. In the air between them, a quiet, steady pulse that said, without words, I see you. I'm not afraid of you. I know what it feels like. Yujito went very still. It was the kind of stillness that comes when something hits you where you didn't know you were vulnerable. Her eyes, dark, guarded, armored with years of isolation and duty and the weight of a beast that lived inside her and hated her for it, widened, just slightly. A fraction of an inch. Barely noticeable. But Naruto noticed. Hey, he said. Simply. Quietly. The way you'd greet someone you were seeing for the first time after a long, long absence. I'm Naruto. Yujito stared at him. The mist swirled between them, gray and cold, and ancient. Behind Naruto, Kakashi had gone very, very quiet. The kind of quiet that meant he was watching everything and processing it all at once, filing it away in the part of his mind where important things went. Yujito opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. I know who you are, she said. But her voice had changed. The flatness was still there. It was a layer too deep to be stripped away by a single moment. But underneath it, something had cracked. Just a hairline fracture. Barely visible. But it was there. They didn't fight. It took 20 minutes of careful, tense negotiation. Kakashi handling the diplomatic side with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent his career navigating exactly these kinds of situations, before Yujito agreed to stand down and let the convoy pass. She hadn't actually been there to attack them, she explained, in the clipped, economical way that suggested she wasn't used to explaining herself to anyone. She'd been tracking a group of rogue shinobi who'd been poaching along the border, former mist operatives who'd gone independent after a purge in the village's ranks. She'd followed their trail here and had sensed 2 Jinchuriki in the area, Naruto and herself, and had come to investigate. It was a reasonable explanation. Kakashi accepted it with the same calm he accepted everything, nodding once, filing it away, keeping his hand near his weapon just in case. But Naruto wasn't listening to the explanation. He was watching Yujito. She stood at the edge of the clearing, arms crossed, her posture deliberately closed off, shoulders back, chin up, the universal body language of someone who wanted the world to know they didn't need anything from anyone. She was good at it. She'd clearly been practicing for a long time, but Naruto could see through it now. The jutsu had given him that, not the ability to read minds, but the ability to read people. To see the cracks in the armor, to notice the places where the mask didn't quite fit, and Yujito's mask had a crack running right through the middle of it. It was in her eyes. In the way they moved, constantly scanning, constantly alert, but never settling on anything for too long. Never lingering, like she was afraid that if she looked at something too closely, she might let herself want it. And wanting things, for Yujito ni, was dangerous. He understood that too. The convoy moved on after the encounter, Kakashi leading them deeper into the mist with quiet efficiency. Sakura walked beside Naruto, her shoulder brushing his, a residual warmth from the pulse still lingering between them, comfortable, unspoken, the kind of connection that didn't need words to sustain itself. Sai sketched in his notebook, oblivious as always, but Naruto kept looking back. Yujito watched them go from the edge of the clearing. She stood perfectly still, a dark figure against the gray mist, arms crossed, face unreadable. And as Naruto glanced back at her one last time before the trees swallowed the clearing from view, he saw something in her expression that he recognized with absolute, painful clarity. Don't go. It was there for less than a second. A flicker. A crack in the stone. And then it was gone, replaced by the flat, impenetrable mask she wore like skin. But Naruto had seen it, and he didn't forget. They camped that night in a shallow dell, sheltered from the worst of the mist by a natural overhang of rock. Kakashi set the watch, Sai first, then himself, and the others settled in for a few hours of rest. The merchant was already asleep, wrapped in his blankets like a cocoon, snoring softly. Sakura curled up near the fire, her face relaxed in sleep, the tension of the day finally released. Naruto sat at the edge of the camp, his back against a moss-covered boulder, staring out into the mist. He couldn't sleep. His mind kept circling back to Yujito. To the loneliness he'd felt radiating off her like heat from a wound. To the way she looked at him, not with hostility, not with fear, but with something much more vulnerable than either. Something that looked like surprise, like she'd encountered something she hadn't expected and didn't know what to do with. He thought about what the scroll had said about the technique's purpose. Created by the first Uzumaki to unite the scattered clans. To heal hearts broken by war. To bridge the gaps between enemies. Yujito was not an enemy. She was a Jinchuriki, like him. Carrying a beast inside her that the world feared and hated, bound to a village that saw her as a weapon rather than a person. She was isolated in exactly the way he had been isolated, for exactly the same reasons. She was him. Reflected in a different mirror, the realization settled into him like something solid and immovable. This was what the jutsu was for. Not for Sakura, not yet, anyway. That connection was still young, still growing. Not for Iruka-sensei, who had never needed the jutsu to care about him. It was for moments like this. For people like this. The ones who had been alone so long that they'd forgotten there was any other way to be. Naruto looked out into the mist, and made a decision. He found her the next morning. It wasn't difficult. Yujito hadn't gone far. Her tracks were visible in the damp earth, leading away from the clearing and looping back through the trees in a wide arc. She was nearby. Watching, maybe, or simply, waiting. Naruto wasn't sure which. He left the camp before dawn, while Kakashi was still on watch but not actively scanning in his direction. A calculated risk. He moved quietly. Another skill the scroll's training had sharpened, and followed the tracks through the mist until the trees thinned and opened out onto a rocky ledge overlooking the river. Yujito was sitting on the edge, legs dangling over the drop, looking out at the water below. The mist clung to the river's surface, turning it into a sheet of gray silk that moved but didn't quite shine. Her back was to him. Her posture was relaxed, genuinely relaxed, for the first time since he'd seen her. Like she'd come here to be alone, and hadn't expected company. Naruto stepped onto the ledge. Made no effort to hide his approach. Yujito didn't turn around. But her shoulders tensed, just slightly, and her hand moved, instinctively, toward the kunai at her side. "It's just me," Naruto said. A pause. Then her hand dropped. She still didn't turn. "You followed me," she said. Not a question. "Yeah." Another pause. Longer this time. The river moved below them, quiet and steady, indifferent to the two Jinchuriki sitting on the ledge above it. "Why?" Yujito asked. Naruto walked forward until he was standing beside her. He didn't sit, not yet. He looked down at the river, at the way the mist curled over it like a living thing, and thought carefully about his answer. "Because I know what it's like," he said. "Being the only one." Yujito turned her head. Just slightly. Enough to look at him from the corner of her eye. A sharp, evaluating glance that was equal parts suspicion and something else. Something hungrier. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "I know you're a Jinchuriki," Naruto said. "I know the mist doesn't treat you like a person. I know you've been alone for a long time, longer than you want to admit." He paused. Looked at her directly. "And I know that yesterday, when I walked up to you and you felt that warmth, you didn't want it to go away." The silence that followed was absolute. Yujito stared at him. Her dark eyes were wide, wider than they'd been yesterday, when the first layer had first touched her. The mask was still there, but it was cracking, visibly, undeniably cracking, like ice under pressure. "What are you?" she whispered. Naruto held her gaze. He didn't activate anything. Didn't project anything. He simply stood there, open and honest and present, and let her see him. The real him. The one underneath the orange jacket and the loud laugh and the bravado. The one who had spent 15 years wanting, desperately, to be seen. "I'm just a kid who got lonely," he said, "and figured out how to make other people feel like they're not." Yujito looked at him for a long time. Then, slowly, she turned back to the river. And after a moment, a long, waited moment in which something shifted behind her eyes, something old and guarded and afraid, she moved. Scooted over on the ledge. Just a few inches. Just enough to make room. Naruto sat down beside her. They didn't talk for a while. The mist moved around them, cold and quiet and ancient. The river flowed below, unhurried and endless. Two Jinchuriki, sitting on a ledge at the edge of the world, watching the water disappear into the gray. It was Yujito who spoke first. "The two-tail hates me," she said. Quietly. Like she was confessing something she'd never told anyone. "It's been inside me since I was 3 years old, and in all that time, 17 years, it has never once stopped hating me." She paused. Swallowed. "Sometimes I think it's right to." Naruto looked at her. At the way her jaw was set, tight, controlled, the way it always was when she was holding something back. At the way her hands were curled in her lap, fingers clenched around nothing. "The nine-tail hates me too," he said. "Or it used to. I'm not sure anymore." He tilted his head, considering. "But I'll tell you something I figured out a while back. The beast inside you, it's not you. And what it feels isn't what you feel. You're allowed to disagree with it." Yujito turned to look at him again. Something in her expression had shifted, not the mask, which was still there, but something underneath it. Something raw and unguarded and almost young. "How do you do that?" she asked. "Do what?" "Say things like that. Like they're simple." Naruto shrugged. "They are simple. People just make them complicated." A ghost of a smile, barely there, gone almost before it appeared, crossed Yujito's face. It transformed her, for just an instant, from the cold, armored Shinanji she presented to the world into someone else entirely. Someone who might have laughed, once, if anyone had ever given her a reason to. They sat together on the ledge until the mist began to thin, and the pale light of morning filtered through the canopy. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable in a way that surprised them both, like a blanket pulled over two people who had spent their entire lives shivering. When it was time to go, Yujito stood first. Brushed the dirt from her pants. Looked out at the river one last time. Then she turned to Naruto, and for a moment, just a moment, the mask dropped entirely. What was underneath it was not cold. Was not flat. Was not the careful, armored blankness she showed the world. It was hope. Small, fragile, barely alive, but there. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Naruto smiled. The real one, not the loud, performative grin he wore like armor, but the quiet, genuine thing underneath it. The one that very few people had ever seen. "Yeah," he said. "You will." She nodded once. Then she turned and disappeared into the mist, silent, swift, gone in seconds. The gray swallowed her like it swallowed everything here. Like she had never been there at all. Naruto stood on the ledge for a long time after she left, listening to the river, feeling the warmth of the connection he made, faint, new, barely a thread, settling somewhere deep inside his chest. It felt different from Sakura. Different from Irika-sensei. This wasn't a door being opened in someone who already had light behind it. This was a light being lit. Kakashi was waiting for him when he got back to camp. Not sitting. Not reading his book. Standing, arms crossed, leaning against the tree at the edge of the dell with an expression that was carefully, deliberately neutral, the kind of neutral that meant he was anything but. The others were packed and ready to move. Sakura shot Naruto a questioning look as he passed, but he shook his head slightly. Later, and she let it go. Kakashi fell into step beside him as they moved out, the caravan filing through the mist in single file. They walked in silence for several minutes, The only sound the soft crunch of footsteps on damp earth and the distant, ever-present murmur of the mist. Yujito ni, Kakashi said, eventually. Not looking at Naruto. Looking straight ahead, at the path through the trees. Two-tailed Jinchuriki. One of the most dangerous ninja in the land of mist. Naruto said nothing. You left camp before dawn to find her? Kakashi continued. His tone was conversational. Light, even. The same tone he used when discussing the weather or complaining about paperwork. But Naruto knew better. He could hear the undercurrent, the careful, measured attention of a man who was putting pieces together and didn't yet like the picture they were forming. Yeah, Naruto said. And when you found her? We talked. Kakashi glanced at him sideways. A single, sharp look, quick enough that anyone not watching for it would have missed it entirely. You talked, he repeated. Yeah, another silence. Longer this time. The mist curled around them, indifferent and endless. Naruto, Kakashi said, and his voice had changed. The conversational lightness gone, replaced by something quieter. Something that sounded, almost like concern. Yesterday, when you stepped forward and spoke to her, I watched your chakra signatures shift. Just for a moment. Something I've never seen before. Naruto kept walking. Kept his face calm. Kept his breathing even. It wasn't an attack, Kakashi continued. It wasn't any technique I recognized. But it did something to her. I saw the way she reacted. Saw the way she looked at you afterward. He paused. And this morning, when you went to find her, you weren't afraid. You weren't cautious. You walked up to one of the most dangerous people on this continent like you were meeting a friend for breakfast. Naruto was quiet for a long moment. The trees moved around them, dark shapes in the gray. Somewhere ahead, Sa was sketching while walking, a talent Naruto had always been vaguely jealous of. Kakashi-sensei, he said finally. Do you trust me? Kakashi looked at him. Really looked, not the quick, evaluating glance of a sensei checking on a student, but the long, searching gaze of a man who was genuinely trying to see what was in front of him. Yes, he said. Simply. Without hesitation. Naruto nodded. Once. A small, careful motion. Then trust me on this, he said. I can't explain everything yet. But what I did, with Yujito, it wasn't dangerous. It wasn't manipulation. I just... He trailed off. Searched for the right words. Found them, finally, in the place where the scroll's teachings and his own heart overlapped. I just made sure she knew she wasn't alone. Kakashi studied him for another long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Okay, he said. The same word he'd used on the rooftop days ago. The same quiet acceptance. The same implicit promise. I'm watching. I'm paying attention. And for now, I'm going to let you do this. They walked on through the mist, the caravan moving like a slow, quiet snake through the gray. Behind them, invisible and silent, the land of mist stretched endlessly, ancient and cold and full of things that had been waiting, in the dark, for a very long time. And somewhere in that gray expanse, a woman with dark eyes and a beast inside her stood on a ledge above a river, watching the mist move, and felt, for the first time in 17 years, something warm. Something that felt, impossibly, like the beginning. It wasn't malicious, not always. It was simply the nature of the place. A community of thousands, packed into a valley between mountains, where everyone knew everyone else's business whether they wanted to or not. Information flowed through the streets like water through channels, from the market stalls to the training grounds, from the jonin lounges to the academy classrooms, carried by whispers and glances and the particular kind of sideways attention that people pay to things that don't quite fit the pattern. And Naruto Uzumaki, for the first time in his life, did not fit the pattern. It started with small things. The kind of observations that, taken individually, meant nothing. A shopkeeper on the east side of the village, a man named Daisuke who had refused to sell Naruto anything for the better part of a decade, found himself, one afternoon, watching the blonde boy walk past his window with an expression of genuine warmth. He didn't know why. He couldn't have explained it if pressed. But something had shifted, somewhere in the last few weeks, and the sight of Naruto no longer triggered the old, reflexive disgust that the village had spent 15 years cultivating. It was the same with others. Teachers at the academy noticed it. The way students who had once been taught to fear the Jinchuriki now watched him with curiosity instead of terror. Parents noticed it too, though they were slower to admit it. Something in the air around Naruto had changed. Something that made people want to be near him, to talk to him, to know him. No one could quite explain it, but people talked about it. Quietly, at first. In the margins of conversations, in the spaces between other topics. Have you noticed Naruto lately? He seems different. There's something about him. And then, louder, Kurenai Yuhi heard the rumors on a Tuesday. She was in the Jonin Lounge, a cramped, smoke-stained room on the second floor of the administrative building where off-duty shinobi gathered to drink, complain, and exchange the kind of information that never made it into official reports. Asuma was beside her, nursing a beer and complaining about his team's latest mission with the theatrical exhaustion of a man who enjoyed complaining almost as much as he enjoyed teaching. Shikaku Nara sat across from them, eyes half closed, looking for all the world like he was asleep but missing nothing. It was Shikaku who brought it up. Has anyone else noticed the change in the Uzumaki kid? He asked, without opening his eyes. Asuma snorted. Hard to miss, isn't it? Kid's been acting like a different person for weeks. Calm. Focused. Actually listens when someone talks to him. He paused, took a drink. Kakashi's been tight-lipped about it. Which means either he doesn't know what's going on, or he does and it's serious. Kurenai said nothing. But she filed it away. She was, by reputation and by training, one of the foremost experts on psychological warfare in Konoha. Genjutsu was her specialty, the manipulation of perception, the bending of reality through chakra-induced illusion. But her true talent went deeper than technique. She understood minds. How they worked, how they could be influenced, without the target ever knowing they were being influenced. It was a rare skill, and a dangerous one, and it made her the person Konoha turned to whenever something unusual happened in the realm of human behavior. Something unusual was happening with Naruto Uzumaki, and Kurenai wanted to know what it was. She requested the investigation formally. The next morning, Tsunade, the fifth Hokage, sitting behind her desk in the tower with the permanent expression of a woman who had seen too much and slept too little, listened to Kurenai's report with a stillness that was, itself a kind of attention. She didn't interrupt. Didn't ask questions. She simply sat, hands folded on the desk, amber eyes sharp and measuring, and let Kurenai lay out what she knew, which wasn't much. Rumors. Observations. The testimony of a handful of jonin who had noticed the shift in Naruto's behavior and couldn't account for it. Kakashi's pointed silence on the matter, which Kurenai noted was itself a data point. Kakashi didn't stay quiet about things unless they mattered. When Kurenai finished, Tsunade was silent for a long time. You think it's a technique, Tsunade said eventually. Not a question. I think it's possible, Kurenai said carefully. The behavioral changes are consistent with something influencing the people around him. Not a standard genjutsu. Nothing that would show up on a scan. Something subtler. Something that works on an emotional level rather than a perceptual one. Tsunade's eyes narrowed. Just slightly. A flicker of something behind them. Not surprise, exactly. Something more complicated. Approved, she said. Observe him. Don't engage directly unless you have to. And Kurenai, she paused, and her tone shifted, quieter, more careful. Be discreet. If this turns out to be what I think it might be, the last thing we need is a panic. Kurenai left the Hokage's office with the uncomfortable feeling that Tsunade knew more than she was letting on. The observation took 3 days. Kurenai was good at surveillance. Better than good. She could watch someone for hours without being detected, blending into the background with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades learning to be invisible. She positioned herself at key points around the village, near Naruto's apartment in the morning, at the training grounds during the afternoon, at Ichiraku's in the evening, and she watched. What she saw confirmed the rumors, and then some. It wasn't just that people reacted differently to Naruto. It was the way they reacted. The shift wasn't abrupt or jarring. It was gradual, organic, like watching ice melt in slow motion. People drifted toward him, smiled at him, made eye contact in a way that suggested genuine interest rather than polite acknowledgement. And Naruto, the Naruto she'd known for years, the loud, brash, almost aggressively cheerful kid who wore his emotions on his sleeve like badges, was different now. Quieter in a way that wasn't silence but awareness. Warmer in a way that wasn't performance but authenticity. It was, she had to admit, impressive. On the third day, she decided to get closer. The opportunity presented itself during a routine medical checkup. Every active shinobi in Konoha was required to undergo a physical and psychological assessment twice a year. A remnant of policy from the third Hokage's era that no one had ever bothered to repeal, mostly because it was genuinely useful. Naruto's appointment was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at the hospital, and Kurenai arranged to be the one conducting the assessment. It wasn't unusual. Jonin conducted assessments all the time, and Naruto had no reason to be suspicious of her specifically. He showed up on time, another change, one that Kurenai noted with quiet interest, wearing his usual orange jacket, his hair still damp from a shower, looking relaxed and easy in the way that only someone who was genuinely at peace with themselves could look. "Kurenai-sensei," he said, settling into the chair across from her with a casual smile. "Hey. Didn't know you did these," I volunteered, she said. Which was technically true. "How have you been feeling lately, Naruto?" "Good," he said. And she believed him, which was itself unusual, because Naruto had spent most of his life saying good when he meant anything but, and she'd always been able to hear the lie underneath. There was no lie here. Just a straightforward, honest answer from someone who was, for once, telling the truth about his own state of mind. They went through the standard questions. Sleep quality, improved. Appetite, consistent. Stress levels, lower than they'd been in months. Physical health, no issues beyond the usual wear and tear of an active shinobi. Naruto answered everything with an ease that bordered on suspicious. But his chakra signature was stable, his pupil responses normal, his vital signs unremarkable. Kurenai pushed gently. Asked about his social life, his relationships, his feelings about his teammates. Naruto answered honestly, or seemed to. He talked about Kakashi with genuine warmth, about Sakura with a quiet affection that was new, and about Yujito. He stopped himself there. A flicker of something crossed his face, caution, maybe, or simply the instinct to keep certain things private. He redirected smoothly, talking instead about the mission to the land of mist in general terms, and Kurenai let him. But she'd seen the flicker, and she filed it away. It was near the end of the assessment, the final few minutes of standard wrap-up, that it happened. Naruto was standing, rolling up his sleeve where she'd taken his blood pressure reading, and he turned to pick up his jacket from the back of the chair. The movement was casual, unconscious, and as he reached for the jacket, his hand brushed against Kurenai's forearm. A brief, accidental contact, no more than a second. In that second, something shifted. It wasn't pain. It wasn't even particularly alarming, in a physical sense. It was a warmth, sudden, unexpected, blooming in Kurenai's chest like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. A feeling of being seen. Of being understood, deeply and completely, by someone who genuinely cared. It was profound. It was beautiful, and it lasted exactly long enough for Kurenai's trained instincts to catch it, analyze it, and recognize it for what it was. She went very still. Naruto, already pulling on his jacket, didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he was very good at hiding it. He smiled at her, warm, easy, the same smile he'd been giving everyone lately, and said, "Thanks, Kurenai-sensei." "Same time in 6 months?" "Yes," she said. Her voice was perfectly steady, perfectly controlled. Years of training held it there, locked in place, even as her mind raced. Same time, he left. The door closed behind him, and Kurenai sat in the examination room for a full 5 minutes afterward, staring at the spot on her forearm where his hand had touched hers, turning over what she'd felt, what she'd recognized, with the careful, methodical attention of someone dismantling a bomb. She knew what it was. She'd read about it once, years ago, in an old archive deep in the Konoha Intelligence Library, in a section dedicated to ancient clan techniques that had been formally classified after the wars. A footnote in a footnote, barely a paragraph, buried so deep that most people would never have found it. Kagyoba no Jutsu. Shadow seduction art. Uzumaki bloodline technique. Origin First Era. Status sealed. Classification: extreme. It was an Uzumaki technique. Ancient. Powerful beyond anything in the standard curriculum. And it was, undeniably, exactly what she had just felt. Naruto Uzumaki had somehow found and was actively practicing one of the most dangerous emotional manipulation techniques in the history of the Shino ninja world. Kurenai left the hospital and went directly to the Hokage's tower. Tsunade listened to the report without interrupting. When Kurenai finished, the Hokage was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the silence itself became uncomfortable. A heavy, weighted thing that filled the room like smoke. "You're certain?" Tsunade said finally. "The signature is unmistakable," Kurenai replied. "I've cross-referenced it with the archived records. It matches." "Exactly." Tsunade closed her eyes. For a moment, just a moment, something passed across her face that looked less like the calm authority of the Hokage and more like the expression of a woman confronting something she had been afraid of for a very long time. "The boy doesn't know what he's holding," Tsunade said quietly. It wasn't a question. "I don't think so." "Not fully." Kurenai paused. "He's learning it. Teaching himself, from the scroll, if I had to guess. He's progressing faster than he should be. The first layer is already active. And I got a flash of something that might have been the second layer during contact." She hesitated. "He's not using it maliciously, Tsunade-sama. From what I observed, he's using it to connect. To make people feel seen." Tsunade opened her eyes. Looked at Kurenai with an expression that was impossible to read. "That's what makes it dangerous," she said. Naruto didn't know about the investigation. He was, that evening, focused on something else entirely. Something that had been occupying the back of his mind since the mission to the mist. Something that kept surfacing in quiet moments, and refusing to be pushed down. He was thinking about Yujito. Not romantically, not yet anyway. That would come later slowly, in the way that things between people who have both spent their lives being alone tend to come. But he was thinking about her. About the way she looked at him on that ledge, and the way the mist had swallowed her when she left. And the faint, barely the thread of connection he could still feel, deep in his chest. If he was very quiet and very still, he was also thinking about training. The scroll's instructions for the third layer, the seal, were still ahead of him. He wasn't ready for it. He knew that. But the gap between where he was and where he needed to be was narrowing, and the practice sessions had been taking on a new intensity. He pushed harder each night. Held the first layer longer. Directed the pulse with greater precision. Tested the boundaries of his control, pushing them out, pulling them back, mapping the edges of what he could do with the same methodical patience that had once been completely foreign to him. It was on one of these nights, a warm evening in late spring, the training grounds empty and quiet, that he first encountered Anko Midarabe. He didn't see her coming. That, in itself, was unusual. Naruto's awareness had sharpened significantly since he'd started training with the jutsu. He could feel people's emotional states from a distance now, could sense the presence of others the way a spider feels vibrations in its web. But Anko moved like smoke. Like shadow. Like something that had been trained, specifically and deliberately, to be invisible. One moment Naruto was alone in the training grounds, running through the 14 hand signs in the dark, his eyes closed. His chakra flowing outward in a controlled, steady pulse. The next, someone was leaning against a tree 10 meters away, arms crossed, watching him with an expression of open, undisguised fascination. Naruto opened his eyes. The woman was tall, taller than Sakura, almost his height, with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and a mesh armor top that left more skin exposed than it covered. Her face was sharp-featured, angular, with high cheekbones and eyes that held a particular kind of darkness. Not malice, exactly, but something close to it. Something that had seen terrible things and had, instead of breaking under the weight, absorbed them. Become something harder. Something that enjoyed the edge. He knew who she was. Everyone in Konoha knew Anko Midarabe, the woman who had been Orochimaru's student. The one who had survived what Orochimaru had done to her, and come out the other side carrying scars that went deeper than skin. The one who smiled too wide and laughed too loud and drank too much, and who everyone gave a wide berth because there was something in her eyes that suggested she could, and might, bite you if you got too close. Interesting, Anko said. Her voice was low, almost lazy. but there was a current of intensity underneath it. Like a river that looked calm on the surface but ran deep and fast below. Very interesting. Naruto didn't tense. Didn't reach for a weapon. He simply looked at her, at the way she was watching him, at the slight curl of her lips that might have been a smile or might have been something else, and felt, with the clarity the jutsu had given him, the shape of her. It was complicated. Far more complicated than Yujito, or Sakura, or anyone else he touched with the techniques so far. Anko's emotional landscape was a wasteland, scorched and barren in places, overgrown with thorns in others, and underneath it all, buried so deep it was almost invisible, a core of something that had once been bright and open and alive, and had been systematically destroyed by the man who was supposed to have been her teacher. The loneliness was there. Of course it was. But it was tangled up with anger and shame and a dark, perverse pride that had nothing to do with anything healthy, and Naruto felt, for the first time, the full weight of what the jutsu was asking him to do, not just to open a door, to navigate a labyrinth. You felt it, he said. Simply. Not a question. Anko's eyebrows rose, just slightly. Oh, you are interesting. She pushed off the tree and walked toward him, slowly, with the deliberate, predatory grace of someone who was very aware of how she moved and enjoyed the effect it had. She stopped an arm's length away and tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she just decided to solve. I felt something, she said. A warmth. Coming from you. Not chakra, not exactly. Something else. She paused. Her dark eyes were sharp, searching. It felt like being wanted. Naruto held her gaze. He didn't activate anything, didn't project, didn't pulse, didn't reach. He simply stood there, open and honest, and let her see him. Maybe you are, he said. Anko stared at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression, a crack in the predatory mask, brief and vulnerable and gone almost before it appeared. She laughed, a short, sharp sound, more surprise than humor. Bold kid, she said. And then, quieter, with something in her voice that sounded almost like relief. When did you learn to do that? Do what? Say things like they actually mean something. They talked for an hour. It was unlike any conversation Naruto had had before. With anyone. Anko didn't dance around things. Didn't soften her words or hide behind pleasantries. She asked direct questions and expected direct answers. And she called out bullshit the moment she heard it. With a bluntness that was almost refreshing after weeks of navigating the careful, layered conversations that the jutsu demanded. She asked about the technique. Not by name. She didn't know the name yet, but she'd felt it, and she was smart enough to know what it was, even if she couldn't identify it precisely. A jutsu that projected emotion. That made people feel something real. She'd encountered genjutsu before, had been subjected to them, in fact, during her time with Orochimaru, and this wasn't genjutsu. It was something else. Something older. Naruto didn't tell her everything. Not yet. But he told her enough. Enough to satisfy her curiosity. Enough to give her a framework for understanding what she'd felt. And in return, she told him things about herself that she had never told anyone. Not the details. Not the specifics of what Orochimaru had done, the experiments, the pain, the years of feeling like nothing more than a tool. But the shape of it. The outline. The way it had hollowed her out and left her with nothing but the sharp edges and the dark humor and the desperate, clawing need to feel something that wasn't numbness. Naruto listened. Really listened. The way the scroll had taught him to listen, with his whole self, not just his ears. And when she was done talking, he didn't offer advice. Didn't try to fix anything. He simply sat beside her in the dark, shoulder to shoulder, and let the warmth of his presence do what it did best. It filled the silence. When Anko finally left, late, much later than either of them had intended, she paused at the edge of the training grounds and looked back at him. The expression on her face was unreadable, even to Naruto's heightened awareness. But there was something in it, beneath the sharp edges and the dark amusement, that was new, something that looked like the beginning of trust. Same time tomorrow? She asked. Naruto smiled. Yeah. Same time. She disappeared into the dark, silent and swift, and Naruto sat alone in the training grounds for a long time afterward, turning over what had happened. Anko Midarabe was not like the others. She was not lonely in the way that Yujito was lonely, isolated and alone. She was not lonely in the way that Sakura was lonely, surrounded but unseen. She was lonely in the way that people who have been broken are lonely. The kind of loneliness that doesn't want to be fixed, that has become so comfortable with itself, so deeply woven into the fabric of who you are, that the idea of anything different feels almost threatening. The jutsu hadn't touched her the way it touched the others. It hadn't opened a door. It had simply made itself known. A presence. A warmth. Something that was there, if she wanted it, without demanding anything in return, and she had leaned into it. Not because she was weak. Not because she was desperate. But because, underneath everything, the scars and the darkness and the sharp, biting humor, she was still, somewhere, the girl who had once believed that the people who were supposed to love her actually did, and she wanted to believe it again. The rumors continued to spread through the village, quietly and persistently, like roots growing through stone. People talked. They compared notes. They watched Naruto with a mixture of curiosity, and something that was beginning to shade toward reverence. Not for anything he'd done, exactly, but for the way he made them feel when he was near. In the Hokage tower, Tsunade sat behind her desk and stared at the wall and thought about ancient Uzumaki techniques and 15-year-old boys with too much power and not enough guidance. And in the training grounds, in the quiet hours of the night, Naruto Uzumaki continued to practice. Continued to push. Continued to reach outward with his heart, one careful connection at a time, building something that he didn't yet have a name for. A network. A web. A constellation of souls, each one touched by the warmth he carried, each one feeling, for the first time, that they were not alone in the dark. It was growing. Slowly, but undeniably it was growing, and somewhere, far away, in a place that Naruto didn't yet know existed, someone was watching. It fell from a sky that was permanently overcast. Thick, gray clouds that hung so low over the city they seemed to press against the tops of the tall, dark towers like a lid on a coffin. The sound of it was constant. A steady, relentless drumming against metal and stone and glass, filling every silence, drowning every quiet thought. The people of Amagakure had grown up with it. They didn't notice it anymore. It was simply part of the world, as unremarkable as breathing, as unavoidable as gravity. Pain noticed it. He sat in the highest tower of the city, in a room that was all black stone and dim light, and listened to the rain with the same expression he wore for everything, calm, measured, utterly devoid of emotion. His Rinnegan eyes, 6 concentric circles of violet, beautiful and terrible, stared at nothing in particular. His hands were folded in his lap. His breathing was slow and even, like someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by anything the world had to offer. On the table in front of him lay a single piece of paper. A report delivered by one of his spy network's operatives 3 hours ago. It contained very little text. Payne's operatives were trained to be concise. But what text there was had been enough to make Payne sit in this chair, in this silence, for 3 hours without moving. The report contained 2 pieces of information. The first was a description of a chakra signature detected near the borders of the Land of Mist. Unusual, ancient, consistent with techniques that had not been used in decades. The operative had been unable to identify it precisely, but had included enough detail for Payne's own considerable knowledge to fill in the gaps. The second piece of information was a name, Naruto Uzumaki. Payne read the name one more time. Then he set the paper down, carefully, and turned his head toward the window. The rain hammered against the glass, streaking it with water that caught no light. Konan, he said. The woman materialized from the shadows beside the door, silent, precise, as if she had been there all along and had simply chosen, until this moment, not to be seen. She was tall and lean, with blue hair that fell to her waist and white paper wings folded against her back like a cloak. Her face was beautiful in a cold, sculptural way, all sharp lines and pale skin and eyes that had seen enough grief to fill an ocean and had, somehow, not drowned in it. She looked at Payne. Waited. The Uzumaki boy, Payne said. He didn't hand her the paper. He didn't need to. Konan already knew. She had access to the same intelligence network, the same reports, the same flow of information that Payne used to maintain his grip on the world. He's developing something. The Kagyo no Jutsu, Konan said. Her voice was quiet. Flat. The voice of someone who had learned, long ago, to keep her emotions sealed behind glass. Pain looked at her. A slight flicker of interest in his expression. The closest thing to surprise he ever showed. "You know it," he said. "I know of it." Konan moved into the room, stopping beside the window, looking out at the rain with the same stillness that Pain wore like skin. The Uzumaki clan's greatest technique, created during the First Era to unite warring factions. It was used to build the foundations of what eventually became the hidden villages. The emotional resonance it creates between people made cooperation possible on a scale that had never been achieved before. She paused. Something shifted behind her eyes, a flicker of something old and painful, quickly suppressed. It was also, she continued, the technique that was used to destroy the Uzumaki clan. When the other villages learned what they possessed, they formed an alliance specifically to eliminate them. The technique was too powerful to allow in anyone's hands but their own. Pain was quiet for a moment. Processing. "And now," he said, "the last Uzumaki has found it." "A 15-year-old boy," Konan said. "Jinchuriki. No clan. No allies beyond his village. And no idea what he's holding." Pain turned back to the window. The rain continued its relentless assault on the glass. "Find out how far he's progressed," he said. "Observe him. Don't engage. Don't let him know we're watching." Konan nodded once. Turned toward the door. "Konan." She stopped. "This technique," Pain said, and his voice carried a weight that was unusual even for him, a heaviness that suggested he was considering something with more care than he usually gave to anything. "It was used to unite nations. To build peace." He paused. "It could also be used to end peace. To bind entire populations to a single will." Konan turned back to look at him. Her expression was unreadable. "Which is it, in the boy's hands?" Pain asked. "I don't know yet," Konan said. "That's what I'll find out." She left. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Pain sat alone in the dark room, listening to the rain, and thought about power. Konan moved like water. It was the best way to describe it. The way she traveled through the world, silent and fluid and almost invisible, slipping through gaps and shadows and the spaces between one moment and the next. Her paper wings allowed her to dissolve into sheets of white, to scatter and reform, to become something that was not quite a person and not quite anything else. It made her one of the most effective infiltrators in the Shinanji world. She arrived in the Land of Fire 3 days after receiving Pain's orders, entered Konoha through the canopy, high above the village, moving through the treetops with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world, settled into a position on one of the older buildings at the edge of the residential district, where she could watch the streets without being seen, and began to observe. Naruto Uzumaki was not difficult to find. He was, after all, one of the most visible people in the village. Bright orange jacket, loud laugh, the kind of presence that drew attention whether he wanted it to or not. But it was the nature of the attention that interested Konan. She watched for 2 days before she understood it clearly. The people around him were drawn to him. Not in the way that people are drawn to celebrities or heroes, with admiration or envy or the desire to be associated with someone important. They were drawn to him the way flowers are drawn to sunlight. Instinctively. Unconsciously. A warmth that had no visible source, pulling them in, making them smile, making them linger. Konan recognized it immediately. She had studied the Kagyobu no Jutsu in Pain's library, one of the few texts on the technique that had survived the destruction of the Uzumaki archives, a fragmentary copy that Pain had acquired decades ago through channels he never disclosed. She knew what it looked like, what it felt like, what it did, and what she saw in Naruto confirmed everything the report had suggested. The boy was using the first layer actively, projecting it constantly, though not always at full intensity. Sometimes it was a whisper, barely there, a background warmth that colored the air around him without demanding attention. Other times it was stronger, a focused, directed pulse that Konan could feel even from a distance, like a note struck on a bell that resonated in the chest. He was good. Better than he should have been, given how recently he must have discovered the technique. His control was impressive, precise, measured, calibrated to each individual he interacted with. It wasn't blunt force. It was surgery, and it was, unmistakably, working. On the 3rd day of her observation, Konan made a decision. She needed to get closer. Yujito arrived in the land of fire on a night when the moon was hidden behind clouds. She had been traveling for 4 days, moving through the countryside in silence, avoiding the main roads, staying to the forests and the ridgelines where the risk of being seen was lowest. She carried nothing but a small pack, a set of weapons, and the faint, persistent warmth in her chest that had been there since the day on the ledge. It hadn't faded. That was the thing that surprised her most. She had expected it to. Expected the feeling to dissipate over time, the way feelings always did when there was no one there to sustain them, but it hadn't. It sat in her chest like an ember, quiet and steady, pulsing faintly in time with her heartbeat, a thread, connecting her to someone she had met once, briefly, on a ledge above a river in the mist. She had spent 2 days after their encounter trying to ignore it, trying to tell herself it meant nothing, that it was a fluke, a momentary aberration. Something that would fade if she simply stopped paying attention to it. But the thread remained. And with it came something else, a pull. Not physical. Not urgent. Simply, a direction. A feeling that somewhere, in a specific place in the world, there was someone who would be glad to see her. Yujito had not felt that in a very long time, so she left the mist. It wasn't a dramatic departure. No confrontation with her superiors, no formal defection, no burning of bridges. She simply stopped showing up. Stopped reporting to the village. Stopped being where they expected her to be. The mist would notice eventually. They would send someone to find her. But for now, for the days and weeks ahead, she was free in a way she hadn't been since she was 3 years old. Free, and moving towards something that felt, for the first time in her life, like choice. Naruto felt her coming. It wasn't the jutsu, exactly, not a conscious activation of any layer or technique. It was the thread itself, the faint connection he made on the ledge, too subtle to be a full bond but real enough to feel, like a vibration in a wire stretched taut across miles of empty space. It had been there since the mist, a quiet awareness, a sense of presence at a distance. And over the past week, it had been growing stronger. She was getting closer. He was sitting on the roof of his apartment when he felt it shift, felt the thread tighten, just slightly, like a compass needle swinging toward north. The night was warm, the sky clear for once, and the village spread out below him in a patchwork of light and shadow. He sat very still, his hands in his lap, and paid attention to the sensation, there, to the east. Moving slowly, steadily, through the countryside beyond the village's borders. A presence he recognized. Not visually, not consciously, but on a level deeper than thought. A heart he had touched, once, and that had touched him back. Yujito, coming to him. The realization settled into him with a weight that was equal parts excitement and fear. Excitement, because the connection he'd made with her in the mist had been one of the most powerful things he'd ever experienced. A moment of genuine, mutual recognition between two people who had spent their entire lives being alone. Fear because what it meant, what her coming to him implied, was something he hadn't fully confronted yet. She was choosing him. Choosing to follow a feeling she couldn't fully explain, to leave everything she knew, to move towards something that had no guarantee of being what she hoped it was. And the feeling she was following, the warmth, the pull, the sense of being seen, was something he had created. Deliberately. Using a technique that had been designed, explicitly, to influence the hearts of others. Was it real? Was what she felt, the hope, the connection, the pull toward him, was it her feeling? Or was it the jutsu, amplifying something that might not have existed at all without his intervention? The question had been circling in the back of Naruto's mind for weeks. He'd pushed it aside, told himself it didn't matter, that the scrolls said the technique only amplified what was already there, that he hadn't created anything false. But sitting on the roof, feeling Yujito's approach through the thread, the question refused to be pushed aside any longer. He had made a choice for her. A choice she hadn't known she was making, and that was a different thing entirely from opening a door. They met 3 days later, in the woods outside the village. Yujito had been camping in the forest, not coming into Konoha itself, not yet. She was cautious by nature and by training, and the idea of walking into a foreign village unannounced, when she was technically still a Shinanji of the mist and had, technically, gone AWOL, was not one she was ready to act on. So she waited. And Naruto, feeling the thread pull him east each night after the village fell asleep, went to her. The clearing where they found each other was unremarkable. A small open space between the trees, carpeted in moss, lit by the pale light of a half-moon filtering through the canopy. Yujito was sitting on a fallen log, legs pulled up, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked, in that moment, younger than her 17 years. Smaller, more uncertain than the armored, cold-faced Shinanji Naruto had met in the mist. She looked up when he stepped into the clearing. Their eyes met. Either of them spoke for a long moment. Then Yujito smiled. It was small, tentative, almost shy, nothing like the ghost of a smile he'd seen on the ledge. But it was real. Genuinely, unmistakably real. You came, she said. Yeah, Naruto said. He walked toward her, slowly, and sat down on the log beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. I felt you getting closer. Couldn't sleep. Me neither. They sat in silence for a while, watching the moonlight move through the trees. The forest was quiet, just the distant sound of insects, and the occasional rustle of something small moving through the undergrowth. The thread between them hummed, steady and warm, like a single note held for a very long time. I left the mist, Yujito said, eventually. Naruto nodded. He'd already guessed, had felt it, somehow, in the way the thread had shifted over the past few days. A loosening. A release. Like a knot being untied. Are you okay? He asked. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Turned it over in her mind, examining it from different angles, the way someone does when they've spent their entire life being asked questions they couldn't answer honestly, and are still adjusting to the novelty of being able to. I think so, she said finally. I think I'm going to be. Naruto looked at her. At the way the moonlight caught the angles of her face, softening the sharp edges, revealing something underneath that was quieter and more open than anything he'd seen from her before. She looked, in this moment, like someone who had set down a weight she'd been carrying for a very long time. Not completely. The weight was still there, somewhere, in the set of her shoulders and the careful way she held herself. But lighter. Bearable. He wanted to tell her everything. About the jutsu, about the scroll, about the technique that had created the thread between them and the questions it raised about the nature of what she felt. He wanted to be honest, fully, completely honest, in a way that the situation seemed to demand. But the words wouldn't come. Not yet. Instead, he reached out, slowly, deliberately, and placed his hand over hers where it rested on the log between them. A simple gesture. Warm skin against warm skin. No chakra. No activation. No technique. Just a hand. Yujito looked down at their hands. Then back up at him. Something moved behind her eyes. Something deep and quiet and enormous. Like a continent shifting beneath the surface of still water. She turned her hand over. Laced her fingers through his. They sat like that for a long time, in the moonlit clearing, two Jinchuriki who had spent their entire lives alone, holding hands in the dark. Konan watched from the trees. She had been following Yujito for 2 days, had tracked her from the border of the land of fire to the woods outside Konoha with the same silent efficiency she brought to everything. It hadn't been difficult. Yujito was careful, but Konan was better. The paper wings made her nearly undetectable. She could scatter into individual sheets, drift on the wind like debris, reform in an instant when she needed to move. She watched the scene in the clearing with the same stillness she brought to everything else. Watched Naruto take Yujito's hand. Watched the way Yujito's face changed. The way the armor cracked, just slightly. And something real and raw and vulnerable showed through. And she felt something. Not the jutsu. Naruto wasn't projecting, not consciously. He was simply sitting there, holding another person's hand, and the warmth that radiated from him was as natural and unconscious as body heat. But Konan felt it anyway. A faint, distant echo of something that made her chest ache in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was the feeling of being seen. She pushed it down, ruthlessly, the way she had learned to push down every feeling that threatened to compromise her mission. Pain had sent her to observe, to report, to assess the threat, or the opportunity, that Naruto Uzumaki represented. Emotion had no place in that assessment, but as she watched the two Jinchuriki sitting together in the moonlight, holding hands like teenagers on a first date, something stirred in her that she couldn't quite push all the way down. something that felt, uncomfortably, like envy. It was later that night, after Yujito had fallen asleep against Naruto's shoulder, and Naruto had carefully extracted himself and walked back toward the village alone, that the guilt hit him. It came suddenly, like a wave breaking over rocks. One moment he was walking through the dark forest, feeling the thread hum warmly in his chest, thinking about the way Yujito had smiled. The next, he stopped, stood perfectly still in the middle of the path. And the weight of what he was doing crashed over him all at once. He had made her feel something. Something real. He believed that, genuinely. The scroll said the technique amplified what was already there, and he believed it. Yujito had been lonely, had been starving for connection, had been carrying the weight of a beast and a village that treated her like a weapon for 17 years. The warmth she felt toward him, was it hers? Truly hers? Or was it the jutsu, magnifying a flicker of something into a flame? And did it matter? He thought about Sakura. About the way she had come to find him at Ichiraku's, drawn by a warmth she couldn't explain. About the way she smiled at him now, open, genuine, without the walls she used to keep up. He hadn't asked for that. Hadn't planned it. But he had caused it. Had deliberately used the pulse on her during the sparring session, knowing exactly what it would do. He thought about Iruka-sensei. About the pride in the old man's eyes that night at the bench. About how Naruto had loved seeing it, even as the guilt gnawed at him. He thought about Anko. About the hour they had spent talking in the dark, and the way she had looked at him when she left. Like he was the first person in years who had made her feel like a human being instead of a cautionary tale. All of them. Connected to him. Drawn to him. Feeling something because of what he had done, what he was doing, every day, whether he meant to or not. The bonds were real. He believed that. The feelings behind them were genuine. Amplified, yes, but genuine. The scroll was clear on that point. But the act of creating them, the choice to reach out, to touch someone's heart with a technique that they didn't know existed, that they couldn't consent to or refuse, that was his choice. Made without their knowledge, without their permission. And that, Naruto realized, standing alone in the dark forest with the thread to Yujito pulsing warmly in his chest, was the thing that kept him up at night. He sat down on the ground, pulled his knees up, put his head in his hands. The scroll had warned him. A lonely heart will amplify it beyond control. He wasn't lonely anymore. Not the way he used to be. The connections he'd made, with Sakura, with Yujito, with Anko, with Iruka-sensei, had filled something inside him that had been empty for 15 years. He felt seen. Felt wanted. Felt, for the first time in his life, like he belonged somewhere. But the connections were built on a foundation he hadn't been honest about. A technique he hadn't disclosed. A power he hadn't explained. And the people he had touched with it. The people who were now, in their own ways, bound to him by threads of warmth and understanding, didn't know. Naruto sat in the dark for a long time. The forest was quiet around him. The thread to Yujito pulsed, steady and warm, like a heartbeat. He thought about telling her. Telling all of them. Laying everything out, the scroll, the technique, the 3 layers, what he had done and why and what it meant. Being honest. Fully, completely, painfully honest. He thought about what might happen if he did. Yujito might leave. Might feel manipulated. Might look back on everything she'd felt, and wonder how much of it was real and how much was the jutsu. And the wondering itself might poison whatever was genuine underneath. Sakura might feel betrayed. Might see the warmth she'd been feeling as something artificial. Something imposed on her without her knowledge. And the trust that had been building between them might shatter. Anko would laugh. Probably. And then she might cut him out entirely, the way she cut out anything that threatened the careful, defended architecture of her life. Or they might not. Might understand. Might look at him and see not a manipulator, but a lonely kid who had found a way to reach out, clumsily, imperfectly, but with genuine intention, and had simply not known how to be honest about it yet. He didn't know which it would be, but he knew, sitting there in the dark, that the not knowing couldn't last forever. Naruto lifted his head. Looked up at the stars, scattered across the sky like cold, distant fire. Took a breath. Let it out slowly. Soon, he told himself. Soon I'll tell them. He stood up, brushed the dirt from his pants, and walked back toward the village, carrying the weight of the bonds he'd made and the guilt of how he made them, and the slow, growing certainty that the reckoning was coming. One way or another, it was coming.